2021 is about your voice. Make your voice heard by starting your podcast today. We make it happen. Pretty Easy Podcasts makes podcasting pretty easy.
Good, crisp football.
Football fans, it is I, Bryant. That is Alan, and that is Dave Naylor. Dave, welcome back to the show, man. Big week for the CFL.
Yeah, it was, and it it felt like a certainty going into the weekend and into Monday before that Board of Governors vote to play. But we've had so many false starts, so many wrinkles, and it just felt like everybody was kind of on pins and needles. And the vote came back very quickly. It was published as unanimous. I've led to believe it actually was unanimous, even though I think they would have announced unanimous anyway. But I'm told it was unanimous. We're playing on August 5th, and this is really exciting. And look, I'm happy for everybody, but most of all, I'm happy for the players. I often say football players love football more than any athletes I know love their sport. And I don't know what I think part of it has to do with, there's such a pain threshold to play professional football, practicing 5 times for every time that you play. You have to love it. And these guys have really, really missed it. I mean, the money aside that they haven't been earning over the time, but I think you're going to see a lot of joy on the field when training camp begins here.
Well, I know you're going to see a lot of joy, at least on this show and in the stands as well. Players, I'm sure, also ready to get on the field after missing almost 2 years, really, of playing football. How huge is this, though, for the CFL's future? And in reality, I kind of thought of what would a no vote have meant for the CFL if that had happened?
I'm probably a little bit counterintuitive on both those subjects, right? Like, I think one thing we got to be careful of here is that, okay, they're going to play. It's going to look like the CFL. The revenues are going to start flowing. I mean, Saskatchewan's premier came out yesterday and said, we're going Texas, right? Everybody into the stadium, full capacity, no restrictions. It all sounds like good news. Unfortunately, I think it's all a bit of a mirage in terms of the overall health of the league, because the systemic issues that were there leading into the pandemic, which were exaggerated by the pandemic, are still going to be there. And every team's going to lose a boatload of money this year. And so we're going to get to the end of 2021 with, teams having absorbed massive losses for 2020 and significant losses for 2021, and still some real critical questions about the business model of the CFL. So I don't want to be the rain on the parade guy. I want to celebrate that the CFL is coming back, but, my business is truth, not just, rose-colored glasses and rainbows. And I think we got to be realistic that as huge as this is to get the league back, and I think it was significant in a lot of ways, it doesn't cure all the CFL's ills. Now, had they not played, I think the danger would have been, if they'd not played, is every team still willing to fund this thing, for another 12 months or 10 months till we get to play? Are there 9 owners that are saying, yep, I'm going to continue to fund this to get us to 2022? And I don't know the answer to that question. In terms of like the league going, there's always this mentality that, like, if a league goes away, it could never come back because people will totally forget about it. And, it could never come back once you get to a certain
Not on
point.
This show.
No, I mean, you guys are XFL guys. You guys went 19 years without your league, right? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
I always go back to the NHL lockout, right? About 405, people were like, oh, they can't miss a year. I was probably saying that. I bet if I look at what I was saying, it was like, you cannot miss a year. And then I was covering the NHL when it came back in 05, 06, and it was like hell's a poppin', right? Like, people couldn't wait for it. It was way more absence made the heart grow fonder than out of sight, out of mind. There were people last summer saying, the CFL doesn't play. That's it. Well, here we are, right? And there's this great enthusiasm for what's going to happen in 6 or 7 weeks. I mean, Ottawa went 8 years without a team, and that, the enthusiasm that came back there was nothing like it had ever been in the previous incarnation. So I'm not one of these people who believes that if you go a certain amount of time without playing, that's it. You can never come back. But I will subscribe to the premise that it is very exciting and very significant that the league is back. And we could get into how that might play into the whole XFL collaboration or not. I really don't know, but I have a couple of theories which are totally contradictory. So it's not going to really help you, but I do have some thoughts.
Yeah. But we definitely want to hear him, David. And yeah, like you said, coming back is a great thing overall. Like, pushing it off another year in this world we live in where instant gratification, if something goes away like that, it's like it's gone forever. I mean, that's how people will react. So in the end, I think it's a good decision. The CFL Board of Governors voted unanimously, whether or not that's true or not. That's a great thing, and I'm super pumped for the CFL to come back. We have the XFL negotiations going on during the season, presumably, which might help with the overall health of the league, even if it is, like you said, not all rose-colored and looking all great, even though they are coming back. So with the XFL negotiations going on as the 2021 season progresses, do you anticipate any kind of movement during the season or announcement? I'm sure behind the scenes, but we all have all these NDAs that we talk about every single week. Do you think we'll see any movement publicly between the CFL and the XFL, or at least the Rock at a CFL game, hopefully in 2021?
Well, it's funny that the Rock at a CFL game was certainly a thought that I had, when I started thinking about things might happen in 2021. In fact, I was on a state TSN radio in Toronto the other day, and the host, Brian Hayes, asked me a great question. He said, okay, here we go. Saskatchewan at Winnipeg, packed stadium, like the heart of the CFL, and the Rock gets flashed up on the screen. What's the reaction?
Oh, yeah.
And I thought that was a great question. And I honestly don't know. I think I said 60-40 positive or something like that. But I honestly, it would be a guess. Look, I'm hopeful that we might learn something about this sooner than later. The league's done a good job of keeping the focus on the return to play. And right from the start, they insisted that return to play and XFL CFL collaboration were on parallel tracks, that there was one was not, and there was all kinds of speculation in the media, they won't play this year unless Redbird funds it and stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. Which I never found a sniff of truth in any of that. I'm not saying I know for sure it wasn't true, but there was no conversation I was ever a part of that led me to believe that was actually the case, and I don't believe that that's what's got us here. So, in terms of when we find something out, I had some indication I thought we might find something out perhaps before the season, in terms of like at least a direction of some kind. I really don't know if that's the case at all. When I know stuff, you guys know I'll sound very certain about what I'm talking about. And when I don't know stuff and I'm purely just speculating on intuition, I will be clear about the difference. And I am out here on the speculating and using intuition. I thought we might find something out before the season. It is really, really tight and locked down. It's kind of going to be bizarre, though, because we've got this season playing out. You're going to have a real celebration of it, the Canadian League and the Canadian Football League coming back. And then you have this other drama playing out behind it. It's hard to imagine we would get to December 12th to be handing out the Grey Cup and everybody would just walk off for Christmas and still not know what's going on with the XFL thing. I can't imagine we're going to go through an entire season, as much as it might be a bit of a distraction. I still think it's possible we might find something out before the season starts. I don't know how you play that one out. It's in terms of timing and communication strategy, it's a tricky one. I mean, I think you actually would like to sort of play out the entire season, hand out the Grey Cup, and then 4 days later send out a press release and say, oh, by the way, And the real intriguing question to me is, what's 2022 going to be? Right? Like I've always said, 2021 was either we're going to play or we're not. We know what the economics of the league are going to be. There's still a CBA. They're going to amend it. 2022 is the curious one for me, because at the end of this year, again, I think they're going to have to do a bit of a hand count about how many owners are still committed to this league because of the economics. And then I'm talking about, the big markets, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. Are the owners there committed to, making those markets sustainable? Or after coming through the pandemic and the first year out, are they looking forward saying, nah, we're not really sure we want to do this anymore? That really is the question. And if there's an XFL collaboration and a new league coming, I think we've all reached the conclusion that league is not coming in 2022. Like that's a 2023 project. I reported that, I think, on our draft show, on May the 5th. Nobody called me out on it. And usually, I was taking a bit of a leap of faith on that one, but if I was wrong, somebody would have called me out on that one. And no one did. So I think we can say safely 2023 is the place. So what's the 2022 CFL season going to be? Or is it possible we could have the Grey Cup handed out and then we'll say, see you in 16 months for the collaboration? Yes. Like, I don't know. This is all speculative.
Yeah, if you take the XFL out of the equation for a
Right.
second, though, like think of it as just CFL. If you get to December 2021, you would think the CFL has already announced their plan for 2022. And
You'd have to.
so,
Yeah, you'd have to know
right?
what
I
you're
mean,
doing. Yeah.
if you're coming in April, that's 5 months away. Like there's a lot of question marks there. So I would think that we're going to learn something before the end of the CFL season.
From a practical standpoint, it feels like we have to, right? From a communication standpoint, it would be tricky. It would be really tricky because you're gonna, your existing fan base is probably, I think, negative on the XFL. Okay, there are some of your existing fans that are very positive on it, but I think the majority of your existing fan base, this whole thing is going to be do we risk pissing off some of what we have to attract what we think might be out there for our future? That's what this whole calculation comes down to. But the immediate reaction is probably going to be more negative than positive. And, dropping that balloon in the middle of the season, it might be a little bit tricky. But I tend to think you're right. Just from a practical standpoint, the teams will need to know, what are we doing heading into the off season? Because the other thing is, the CFL has a bit of a dead business zone, and it goes from kind of mid-December to mid-January, where teams basically shut down. It's one of the things actually, coaches and GMs actually like about this league as opposed to working in the NFL is there actually is an off season. Like you can go to Hawaii for a month, and not do anything basically. And that's really December, early January is kind of where that kicks in for the CFL. So if you haven't announced something by the Grey Cup, you're really talking about probably the latter part of January. And look, teams would obviously making massive, significant decisions by that time for the 2022 season. So yeah, the more you lead me in this conversation, the more I think we absolutely have to know something before the end of the year. And as I say, I think it's possible we could know something significant before kickoff.
For sure. And you mentioned the fan bases too. And I think, fan bases want information.
Yeah.
Whether it's the XFL, the CFL, everyone has an opinion. They want to give their opinion. They want to feel something towards a league. And that just got me kind of actually thinking, like, what was the original kind of fan base thought, or what did everyone think? Or even maybe the owners and all the league personnel, when the XFL originally announced that they were going to come back, like, was it a worrisome, or they're like, hey, it's the XFL, it's okay, we're fine? Or were they kind of worried and thinking about this back in 2018, 2019?
Let me back you up a little bit to before the Alliance of American Football kicked off, okay? Because that was the one that scared the bleep out of everybody. Okay? The XFL was kind of like, we'll see when we get there, and we saw the XFL in 2001. But the Alliance was the one that people really thought maybe had figured it out, interestingly enough, given what happened, that, league imploded financially after 6 weeks. But, they seem to have a really, their pay structure made sense. They had a lot of support for players, in terms of, transitioning out of football and things like that. And I remember the XFL played in 2020, the AAA played in 2019. So I remember in August of 2018, GMs in the CFL freaking out because all of a sudden they couldn't sign players, because they'd call a guy and say, hey, we're looking for a defensive back. When can you get on a plane and get out here? Sorry, man, I'm going to the AAF. Like their whole negotiation list were just full of guys saying no. And I had GMs calling me and saying, I've never had more trouble getting a player to Canada than I'm having right now. And we need to be dealing with this, and we need to be talking about this. And there were all kinds of other issues floating around the league at that time. But the one that was really had the attention, at least the football personnel, was the AAF. Like, what's our response going to be? What are we going to do? So, of course, the AAF comes up. They play 6 weeks. They implode. They're gone. So by the time the XFL came around again, everybody was kind of like, okay, our best strategy on this stuff is wait and see, right? We've been around in some form for 100 years. We've weathered lots of storms, including alternate leagues. And our strategy has always been focus on ourselves, ignore what's going on outside, and we will stand the test of time, and they won't. And that's what happened. Now, the XFL, when people say twice failed league, and I know there's a lot of jokes about that and things, that, we obviously acknowledge that one of those failures was beyond their control, like beyond anything anybody could have done. But no, I don't think people were it was almost like the experience with the AAF had reminded everybody that, we'll worry about this once these other leagues prove that they're sustainable. There was a bit of panic, actually. I don't know if you guys know this. There was a talk about an XFL CFL collaboration back in 2001. And it was, in fact, Jeff Giles, who was the commissioner of the day, I called him about 2 weeks ago, just say, hey, remind me how this went. And I think it was that he called Vince McMahon looking to see if he was interested in owning the Toronto Argonauts, because at that time the Argos needed an owner. And he wasn't interested, but he was going to start his own football league. And could they collaborate? And Jeff Giles took that conversation to the Board of Governors, and it lasted about 10 seconds. It was he just said it went nowhere. But that's 20 years ago.
Yeah, that was a different Vince McMahon in terms of the business world, and people wanted to make deals. I think if that happened in 2018, it might have been a different conversation. But you bring up the AAF and then the XFL. You said them waiting to see if these leagues would be sustainable, and you see the XFL before the pandemic seemingly looked like they were on the right track. So I have to believe that informed the CFL Board of Governors and Randy Ambrosi and everybody involved in the negotiations now, saying, we did have issues getting players, and that was before things were looking good for a spring league. Because I've been saying now we're going to get into the USFL in a minute, but the last few months, a spring league is going to hit. It's going to last in the United States. One of them is going to hit. It's just a matter of time and who's going to have the right timing. And now it looks like we have multiple leagues making the attempt again coming up. You have the USFL making a return with Fox, and it looks like it kind of just looks like a rebranding of the Spring League that's currently going on, Dave, but I'm sure they're going to pump a little bit more money into it. What are your thoughts on the return of the United States Football League impacting the XFL CFL alignment?
Well, I guess the first thing is it's going to be called the USFL, and they're going to use USFL team names and logos. But if I call my house Graceland, does that mean it's Graceland?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? It's got
depends
the name
well you could see
and the logo, but you know what I'm saying? The USFL was a straight up competitor to the National Football League that, went after the top players coming out of college and existing NFL stars. I mean, people forget Chris Collinsworth was a USFL player, after Cincinnati. Billy Sims, Brian Sipe. Never mind the guys, the Herschel Walkers and the guys, they got coming out of college and such. I mean, they were rating legit NFL stars. Now, in this day and age, that is blow your brains out money, right? Which ultimately is what the USFL did anyway, the original. But I can't believe that in this day and age that somebody would have enough money, television money or others, to actually go down that road. Okay, so let's assume they're not going to until we find out otherwise. So they're going to do it the same way every other spring league has done it, which is capitalize on the fact that there is a surplus of talented football players that will play for very, very little money. In fact, the spring league found out how little, for nothing, or actually pay to play, right? If it's a short enough season. So, look, I find it weird calling it when they say the USFL is coming back, right? Because even the Doug Flutie promotional video, it was great. We had these guys and these guys and these guys, and this new league's going to have none of that. That's, so it's, I struggle with calling it the return of the USFL. But once we've got that out of the way, look, it does feel like the evolution of the Spring League, right? And I actually communicated with Brian Woods, the CEO of the Spring League, and asked him, is this the Spring League evolved, or is this like a separate entity? And he said it's a separate entity, future of the Spring League to be determined. So, one may disappear and the other may replace it. Call it what you want, but this is certainly the people behind the Spring League that are going to do this. It's really, really tough to judge this league because they've released so few details, right? Like the USFL is back. Period. That's it. And until we learn more, like what their pay structure is going to be, what their season's going to be, who their coaches are going to be, where they're playing, what cities, all those kind of things. It's I always joke that every one of these leagues, and God, I'll give the XFL credit because they actually didn't do this. Their second name tradition, like Memphis and Birmingham, are on the passport of every one of these leagues. Like, you know what I mean? It's like you do an alternate football league, you're going to Memphis and you're going to Birmingham, which, by the way, the CFL went to both those places, right? So anyway, but the XFL in this most recent did not. But I guarantee, I somehow feel like that's where, the USFL will be. It's really tough to judge. Now, I know some people associated with that league, and maybe to put it a little more specifically, I know some people who are close to people who are in associated, and some word is filtered to me that they are, very bullish on what they're going to do, and not really scared of the CFL XFL collaboration, which kind of I find interesting as well. Since I suspect they probably don't know much more about it than you or I do in terms of the secrecy and the lockdown nature of it. But look, count me in the skeptical corner on the USFL. And I know, look, the fact that Fox is behind it and has an equity stake matters, but is it $100,000 equity stake? Is it $100 million equity stake? I mean, it could be anything. There have been a number of spring leagues. I'm thinking you guys, I don't know you that well, but I'm thinking you're both, pretty serious students of alternative professional football. So you guys, I'm sure, are aware of leagues that have been on the drawing board that never ever played, right? The Professional Spring Football League of 1992, which was supposed to play its red, white, and blue bowl at RFK Stadium in June of 1992. They never played a game. There was the A League. Remember the A League? It was somewhere on a whiteboard. Forget who was behind that one. But so there have been a number. And I don't want to say that I know enough to say the USFL will never play, but I would say enough to say that if somehow they didn't play, I wouldn't be shocked. And I'm not trying to be cynical or skeptical of them. I just don't know enough details. You can't put out a press release that says the USFL is back and nothing else, and ask me to believe that you're everything you're doing. So I'm going to reserve judgment, but I do put myself in a slightly skeptical camp on the USFL.
Yeah, especially if you're kicking off in 10 months, like you're saying, right? Like you can't just put out a piece of paper, right? You got to come out with some.
Yeah, just a Doug Flutie video with him wearing a cool General's hat or whatever he was wearing. I mean, the logo's coming back's exciting, and we'll be able to buy that merch, I think, at least if anything, Dave, even if they never play. They have the rights to all the logos.
Exactly. It's just the identity of that league is kind of the one spring league that worked, right? But it was also the one spring league that's again, had legit star players. I was like, here's a little USFL trivia for you. I think this is right, but it's it's in my head. No one told it to me. But who were the last 3 active players from the USFL? Like 3 guys that played in that league. There were the last 3 that were still playing professional football.
I'm gonna say Doug Flutie.
1.
Reggie White.
2.
Ooh.
Herschel Walker.
No.
Missed on the 3rd.
This guy played for the Memphis Showboats. He played a little bit in the NFL with the Philadelphia Eagles, and he played a long time in Canada and still lives in Canada, actually.
Oh, man.
You guys may not know him.
Stump me. He stumped me.
One of the greatest returners in CFL history, Henry Gizmo Williams. You guys know that name?
I've heard the name Gizmo. Yes,
you got to get on and Google him and get some more Gizmo highlights after this one. Yeah, he was he was tremendous, and I say still a guy who lives in the Edmonton area, and I believe those are the last 3 active USFL players. So there you go.
It's a hell of a history, that league. So if anything, someone just at least capitalizing on the USFL is a smart thing. So we'll see what they do. But the interesting thing to me, Dave, is that Fox is involved. Like you said, we don't know how much stake they have in it, but for them to put that out, and it was all over their TV that day too. Like they're putting it out there. So I have to believe at least an entity like Fox Sports would, think carefully before doing anything like that, because it would look kind of like egg all over the face, especially when you have another league like the XFL coming back, which presumably will be competition. Or will it be? Is there room for 3 leagues, the CFL, the XFL, and the USFL to all play in the same year, the same calendar year, football year round with the NFL?
Well, we always, I think, kind of lull ourselves into this, that there are so many players, right? But there is a limit because if you're saying you can just delve into the player pool forever, then what you're saying is the quality of players don't matter, because obviously the further you go down, the lower the quality of the players becomes. So if you're going to string it over, especially with, National Football League rosters are bigger now in this last CBA, right? Their practice rosters are bigger. So they're eating up more of the player pool without even adding teams. Then you throw in XFL, and then I guess the question is going to be also like, what are the economics of those leagues going to be, right? And if you're getting paid $10,000 more in one league versus another, that's significant for when you're talking about real people money, and that's again when you look at what Fox got out of the spring league, right? I don't know what they were paying for the spring league, but that had to be the cheapest programming in the history of television. Right? You're not even paying the players, so I assume that's kind of going to be that's their entry point, right? Is that it's very cheap programming that on a per what it costs them per dollar produce pretty good ratings.
Yeah.
But back to your question, I don't think there's room for two spring leagues, and we thought that when the AAF and the XFL were both planning back. So okay, this is going to be. There's no way this is sustainable to have two leagues playing concurrently, right? The CFL now we don't know when the spring league is going to play. The spring league could be playing, February, March, April, for all we know, and the XFL, CFL could be playing April to August, which I think if they do it, that's where they're going to play. But I think there are real limits to the number of players that you can take out of the pool and still have quality football, and there's lots and lots of players, but at a certain point, I think you're going to start to see diminishing returns. So no, I think that's a real issue, and I think it's going to take it's a problem that's going to take care of itself. We know when you say somebody's going to make it work in the spring, there's going to be a sustainable spring league. I tend to agree with you. As much as I've been a skeptic about spring football, most of my life, I do see things happening now in terms of the importance of live programming, the continued popularity of football as the number one sport, and the gaming part that comes in that may be enough to push this across the line in a way that it never has. But to imagine more than one league surviving in the spring, I cannot. That's going to be a battle of attrition, right?
Most of us have come around to finally saying, okay, I think a spring league could work, but now they're asking us for multiple spring leagues at the same time. That's a little over the top.
No, and the XFL thing, let's be honest, is going to, if it happens, the CFL, it's going to be a spring summer league, right? And and football in the summer actually makes a lot of sense. You're not like, think of your competition in the summer. NBA, nope. NFL,
baseball,
nope.
That's it.
Yep. NHL, nope. It's MLS, which I don't watch, and based on viewership, like a lot of people that don't watch. It's more of an attendance league than it is a television league, and that's true here in Toronto, where the MLS franchise has been wildly successful. They pack their stadium, but they don't. But the Argos do better TV ratings. It's kind of a weird thing. And so it's not a major force in television. And then it's baseball, right? And baseball is on all the time. People don't stop their lives for a baseball game very often, right? It's unless you're a baseball addict. It's not appointment viewing as much as, especially in the middle of the summer, the dog days of summer. It's something that's always around. So yeah, I think we're probably spending, too much time focusing on how do you make it work in the spring and not enough time looking at and I've always thought this on the CFL guys, like, why does the CFL not have a television contract in the U.S. in July and August, to get, like, what are they up against, right? And I there were times that when there were CFL games on tape delay, like on, ESPN2 and stuff, and I'd look at the ratings, and then I'd look at some, like, MLS live ratings, and I'm like, don't these guys have, like, a giant TV contract, and they're getting beat by CFL games on tape delay, right? And I'm not talking about it as a rule, but I remember looking at stuff like that, right? That it just felt like with the – and this has been one of these things that I'm sure they've tried. I'm not smarter than the people who work in the CFL offices over the last 20 years. I'm sure they've had these conversations. But when you do have some household names from U.S. college and you're playing football and there's no other football being played in North America, it's always felt like the CFL has been sort of sold short as a television entity, in the U.S. And, we'd always see that, a kick return or a great interception or something would make the highlights on ESPN when there was no other football on. And it just felt like there was more of an opportunity there. So when I look at the potential of, XFL, CFL collaboration, I don't so much get excited about, football in, April and May as I do thinking about the potential of it in the U.S. in June, July, and August.
Now, I'm all for that too. We've talked about the scheduling, Bryant. The at least going into July a little bit, I think we've said would be a good idea. Bryant's a real stickler for when the schedule would be for the alignment of the leagues. He's a big fan of that.
Give me your schedule.
I haven't had a chance to dive into the CFL schedule, but it's all about even and balance and making sure you play the right teams all the time. this, if let's just say, Dave, if the two leagues were to merge, I hate the idea of keeping the CFL and the XFL separate. I feel like
Oh,
it should be together. Like everything should, no conferences, like make divisions. I want to see BC play Seattle. Like these are the things that you want to see.
yeah.
I know that's probably not what's being discussed, but it's just, I want information.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking at first you'd be better to go kind of north south, right, in terms of conferences like AFC, NFC. But then I'm thinking if your problem is in the major markets that the league seems sort of too traditionally Canadian. Yeah, you want Toronto playing DC, playing Dallas, playing Houston, right? You don't want them just playing Saskatchewan and Winnipeg and all that. And in terms of the leagues really operating separately and like coming together for playoffs or some championship game or something like that, I'm led to believe that is not, that this is going to be more of a we're all in or we're not in at all kind of operation. It's not going to be, hey, let's have a championship game at the end of the year. Our champ plays your champ and we'll hybrid no, it's going to be like we're more like the creation of a new league. Now, that doesn't mean that there couldn't be real, NFC, AFC type conferences where your schedule will be weighted against your own conference. I mean, I don't think that's terrible. The more I've been thinking about it, you might want to have everybody in the mix, rather than just, mostly Canadian teams playing Canadian teams and American teams playing American teams. Television would play into that a lot. So, I mean, obviously, TSN, my employer, whenever, same thing in any sport, if we have two Canadian teams playing each other, whether it's MLS or NHL, that we get to draw on two Canadian markets to produce the rating, right? And same thing in the US when you're talking about this league. So I'm sure that there would likely be, just for television purposes, whoever the XFL, CFL's television partner is in the US probably wants a lot of US matchups. And in Canada, we would still want Canadian matchups because I think for television, you're going to draw bigger audiences that way.
Well, I remember the old NHL deal. I think was it CSN? No, I forget.
They've been with everybody, man. No, CBC. Yeah, they were with CBC. Yeah,
CBC had the first two choices of the playoffs, right? And no matter what the playoff matches were, it would always go for the Canadian matches, right? So if there was like a Toronto, they would always go there, and if there's like an Ottawa and whoever, they would always go there.
Yeah,
so I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, and NHL audiences tend to be very, very regionally focused, right? Not as much in Canada as in the US, but I still think they're way more regional than people acknowledge.
So for this upcoming CFL season, Dave, I mean, now we've kind of covered everything else that's going on in addition to the big season everybody's been waiting now 2 years for. We have XFL talks, the USFL's coming back, the uncertain future of the CFL. Do you and Canadian CFL fans feel like the stakes are raised on the 2021 season? Like you even kind of mentioned it earlier, like this might be it for another 16 months. Who knows? I mean, what the future is for the CFL. So this is a pretty big 14-game season coming up.
Yeah, it is. And I think just because of all the uncertainty, wanting to see that the league can pull this off, the quality of the game, and just the league is back when there was some real uncertainty about whether it would be back. And really, if there hadn't been a vaccine roll out as quickly as there wouldn't have been back. There was no plan B for the CFL. It doesn't exist. And so I do think there's a lot at stake in terms of, the owners have to feel like this league has a future. And if it's a season that feels like this league doesn't have a future, that's going to be challenging. But I do believe there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm. I think there's going to be a lot of people rushing back to the parks, and I think we're going to see more absence, making the heart grow fonder for CFL football than we are out of sight, out of mind. Now, I have two schools of thought about how this season could play into the XFL possibility, and they are completely contradictory, and I don't know which one I believe. So here they are. One is the CFL has a great season. The crowds return. The economics are better than anybody imagines, and the absence and the brush with death that if the CFL had, if you consider it that far, I don't want to say they had a brush with death, but they had to face their own mortality. Let's just put it that way. At some point along during the pandemic, leads to a rejuvenation. You could look at that and say, well, maybe we don't need the XFL collaboration at all. Okay, that would be one way. Or you could look at it and say, this gives us an opportunity to go to the table with the XFL from a position of strength. We're not the desperate league that's dying on the vine that's saying to the XFL, save us. We're the 50-year-old league or 60-year-old league that's really been around. Our teams have been around for 100 years. We have established fan bases. We have good television ratings. We know we've got to evolve from the future, but we're coming to the table from a position of strength, not one of desperation. We don't have to do a deal that doesn't make sense, and we can bargain, from a position of strength, not totally weakness. Now, that's one way of looking at it. The other one would be if this year is a disaster, if the fans don't come back, if the economics are worse than people think, if there's a blah about CFL football and the owners are getting frustrated, does that force them back into an XFL conversation? Because, and this is what I think brought them to the XFL in the first place. They don't want to say this, but it's desperation. It's a crisis. Okay, that's what brought them to the table. They don't want to, and so if you're still in crisis mode, does that force you into the XFL's arms? I tend to think that it's probably more likely that a crisis drives the XFL process than strength. Now it may be neither, right? This thing may have its own life, and that the 2021 season that we talked about being kind of, parallel to the whole XFL process, it may have no bearing on it at all. Like this may be, hey, we've got to think about the next 20 to 50 years of our league. And what happens in the next 4 months really is going to be important to us, but it doesn't really speak to our future. So what we do with the XFL is going to be independent. That's probably the way to look at that. But we know humans are emotional and they have short-term memory and they react to what they see immediately. So yeah, if it was a really desperate year for the CFL, I think that would probably, sway some thoughts and minds more towards willing to. It's all about a risk reward with the XFL. So if this is a disastrous CFL season, would it sway some of the owners to accept a little more risk on the XFL possible collaboration? I think it would. But it might put the league at a slightly better bargaining position. Anyway, I gave you guys just a whole swimming pool of thoughts. Most of those things contradict things I said earlier in the conversation. We're pretty early in this, but these are the kind of things that have been swirling around in my mind, just trying to figure out, well, how's this season going to play out and affect the 2020, what they do with the XFL? And obviously the answer is I don't know, because I just threw a whole garbage load of thoughts at you guys.
Dave, I've had a lot of the same thoughts as well about what this season might mean for the negotiations and the implications. But also, ultimately, I am kind of siding on, I don't think it really matters. I don't
think it does either.
They're what we know about the CFL business model. That is what has brought them to the table with the XFL, and the future of the league, like you said, the next 20 to 50 years is what's at stake. So they're thinking long-term here.
Yeah. And we know the CFL's business model is not going to be great this year. It might be better than they expect, might be worse, but even better than they expect is still going to mean losses for every team across the board this year. It's a virtual certainty.
Well, it speaks a lot to the owners willing to take that risk because they do see a future, and with that, I would think the future is with the XFL. So I think everyone should at least enjoy the 2021 season and hope that in 2022 or 2023 things are getting better and better for both.
Let me throw one more at you guys here, and I may have mentioned this to you when I was on your show before, but when we talk about what the 2022 season is, what would you think? Because this idea has been tossed out there, and not from people that aren't associated with it, that you play the XFL CFL collaboration, if it's a go for 2023, and you're going hybrid rules, okay? Like it's going to be, I'm just going to make up the principles here: 4-down football, bigger end zones, wider field. Okay. What would you think if the CFL came back in 2022 with its 9 teams and played a year with the new rules as a transition for its existing teams into the 2023 season?
I would be all for that. I think that would make sense to, give people a taste of what's to come. I ffeel like in Canada they'll have a different thought on that.
See, I'm not big on soft launches. I'm kind of like, what? Like, because if it goes badly, right? Think about what that does to your 2023. Like, I just think it invites a scenario that you do not want to contemplate, and that is that you roll out this new game and you pissed off all your existing fans and not attracted the new ones, because you're not really a new league. You're old enough to still keep the new fans away potentially, but new enough to piss off your existing fans. I worry that could happen.
I'm also coming out, if we're doing a merge and all the hypotheticals there, I am these days leaning more towards like an MLB situation, AL with a slightly different rule than the NL, CFL conference with slightly
Now
different
that
rules
would be
than the
in football.
XFL.
That would be, that the problem with that is that if you're talking about like the two games right now, right? The
Completely
CFL
different
and
rule books.
well, yeah, like what do you do with that 340-pound nose tackle in this Canadian Football League? Because he's not running side to side, right? Like it's side to sideline, and there's not enough of a need to just stuff the gaps in the middle of the line of scrimmage, with that guy. So there are certain,
he's like the DH.
yeah, he becomes the DH. He doesn't play when you go to Canada.
Yeah.
So
I always tell Alan, it's like in baseball, people complain about the DH being in two leagues or not in one league.
Yeah.
Imagine just playing in different fields, different rules, different amount. It just seems too acidine for my brain to even.
Well, you guys have, I'm sure, found like the stuff from the 1960s, right? About like CFL and NFL exhibition games, right? Where they actually did that. In fact, I believe in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, I believe there's a program of a Chicago Bears at Montreal Alouettes game, or vice versa, right? Like it's actually in Canton. Because I remember like taking a picture with my phone or something and like shooting it out or whatever. So I think the Argos played. Is it the Steelers or the Cardinals when the Cardinals were in St. Louis at that time? Like there were a handful of games that were done like that, right? Which is amazing to think because it's not that long ago that this took place. So and they did. I forget what they did with the rules. I think they kept it consistent for an entire game, but obviously they had to choose one set, or they weren't playing a half of one and a half of another. But I don't know. It would be really tricky because the rules are significantly different enough, at least the way the games are right now. I mean, we didn't even get into the kicking game, right? Like, which is special teams is totally different stuff. So,
well, people are loving the XFL kicking game, Dave.
Oh yeah,
that's
that's a big
sticking point.
Yeah, no, I love the XFL kicking game. I thought that was brilliant.
And a lot of the people that were involved with the XFL in 2020 aren't there anymore, but there was a lot of pride taken into that rule book. So to see it blown up kind of hurts. Right, and I'm sure on the CFL side it would hurt too, but I think both leagues are going to take a look at this and do their homework. They're not just going to say how hypothetically we're saying wider field, 4 downs. Everything has to make sense, and I'm hoping that whatever the rules may be, that they did the due diligence and actually figure out what's best for both leagues.
It's a fascinating process, like we were talking about it even at TSN one day about how. It's almost like if you went into a pizza restaurant and they give you that, build your own pizza, right? And you can say, well, and this is kind of like, if the leagues go down this road, it's going to be kind of like that, right? Everyone's eaten lots of pizza in their lives. Well, you get a chance to build your own. Everybody's watched lots of football. We've seen some different versions. Okay, what if you had to build your own game? What would you involve? What would you add? What are the best elements of all of them? Like the XFL kickoff rule. When I watched that, I thought that's brilliant because the issue that made kickoffs in danger in the NFL was a health and safety issue, right? Really, really big, fast guys running down the field, crashing in at full speed into other really big, fast guys. Shocking, that led to disproportionate amount of injuries. So, all they did was minimize that play, which has now turned it into the most boring play in football. And, in the CFL, they haven't gone that direction. The physics in the CFL are a little gentler and kinder than they are in the NFL because you've got smaller players on a bigger field. So there's actually just the physics is in your favor for the game to be a little bit safer. And kick returns is such a huge part of the CFL game because of the big field, right? That's what people. Some of the greatest highlights in the CFL are games where you have multiple kick returns for touchdowns. And then you look at what the XFL did, and they managed to preserve the kickoff and make it safe. Like I thought it was brilliant. I really, objectively, when you compare it to what the NFL is doing right now, like watching kicks sail through the end zone and, guys just kind of turn their palms upward and jog off to the sideline. Why is that an acceptable play? It shouldn't be, especially when you combine it with, having the fair catch on punts. That's a lot of guys either receiving footballs and like handing it to the official or watching footballs sail over their heads and, running off to the sideline.
Ton of wasted plays.
Wasted plays for sure.
Plays with nothing.
Plays with nothing. Yeah.
And
with the NFL can get away with it, but sorry.
I love the pizza analogy, Dave. Then I have a question on that. So would you say the rouge is the pineapple on pizza of football?
It is. Yeah. Or it's the anchovies. I don't know which, right? It's like, like I love this Canadian football. Actually, it is. It's more the anchovies, right? This is even among CFL fans. You get a lot of this, right? Like Oh, I love the Canadian game. Absolutely love the Canadian game. It was way better, except that single point. Right? It's kind of like the anchovy thing. Man, I love so and so's pizza. It's great. Just no anchovies. It's the same thing, right? And it is still really a sticky point. I actually am okay with the 1 point, because in the like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, like the whole argument against it is you could win a game by missing a field goal on the last play.
Yeah.
Like you could have a team line up, boop, that was it. And I guess my argument against it is that so rarely happens. Like it has happened, but it's not like you see that, once a week or even once a season. It is so rare. And of course, with the deep end zone, if somebody does miss, you guys have probably seen one of those plays where somebody grabs it and kicks it back out, and then they kick it back in. And every once in a while, the game I remember being at a game with somebody who hadn't watched a lot of Canadian football, and the game ended like that. And they just turned to me and said, what in God's name just happened? Right? Because it's like all of a sudden, a sport that they'd recognized for 3 hours turned into something that they didn't recognize at all. Right. And so I'm actually probably still pro Rouge. Yeah.
I think I might be too. If they throw that into what the XFL rule book was, I'd be all for it. Just add that.
And the historians will tell you that kind of, if you look at the evolution of football, there was kind of it kind of rewarded field position, sort of, was, I guess, is kind of as part of the way that it was seen. If you go back to
I'm excited to watch the CFL this season. I'm excited to watch the CFL this season with Brian. It's his first season. He's paying attention to the most anticipated CFL season in XFL history. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Well, I love that. That was after the most CFL. What is it? The most anticipated CFL week in XFL history.
CFL draft. The most anticipated CFL draft.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, who are you guys following? It obviously, from where you sit, it's probably easier to pick a team to follow and then sort of follow the leagues on the back of that. Have you guys got a team for each of you?
That's what I did a few years ago. I followed the Riders. Gotcha. When I was hosting a radio show in Lafayette, Louisiana.
Okay.
I'd give obligatory updates on the Rough Riders that no one cared about down in Louisiana.
Okay. Lots of Southerners on the Rough Riders. They got lots of Alabama guys, all that stuff.
Yeah. And I think in fairness to the show, I shouldn't pick the Marcus Rough Riders just because it gives us a little bit more of a I don't know.
And they have enough fans. You may know that.
Now I'm thinking I might go with the Elks just because they're new, I'm new. Let's just go new together. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll put my my allegiance out there on Twitter and put it on a poll or something.
The Elks, at least, it's you'd be jumping on the new brand, right? And riding with that. It's funny, when we talk about the popularity of CFL teams, the popularity of fans in Saskatchewan, and you guys probably are aware of this. It's such a monster in this country, right? Like even sometimes at TSN, we're like, hey, we could put up a poll, for what's the greatest Grey Cup team of all time. And we're like, yeah. And the responses will be the first 5 teams would all be like, I don't think they've won, be like the top 3 will be Saskatchewan. You know what I mean? Just because the engagement of the fans. And I go down to Mexico on when I get to vacation, which I haven't for a while, but when you go down to the beach in Mexico and there's guys, selling stuff that's just unlicensed and that they make and whatever, but it's obviously market driven, right? They have no agenda other than what will sell, what can we make turn into cash on the beach in Mexico, and you look at it and you see Steelers, Patriots, Cowboys, Rough Riders. It's like that's what sells.
That's what it's all about, Brian. Just know that as you're making your decision before August 5th.
We'll definitely have that decision in place. What a season it's going to be, Dave. Thanks again, man. Always there. And I'm sure we'll have you a few more times here before we try to figure out exactly what the heck this all means for the XFL and the CFL.
Well, guys, thanks for keeping it light and keeping it fun, because there's been enough days in the last 19 months that have not been that light and fun when it comes to the Canadian Football League, that it's great that we can have a laugh and speculate about the future and get ready to enjoy the season. You guys are going to love it.